All right, last lecture of this unit. So we'll have a test coming up. Look to the syllabus to see the dates for the exam. All right, I got to record this lecture before my kid wakes up from her nap. So we're going to just hop to it. So this lecture is about income inequality. A lot of this unit has been about government and money. And so today we'll talk about changes in sort of income and as well as wealth inequality, how that's changed over time. Okay, so just real quick, some terms. Income inequality, and we're going to talk about that first. That's the difference in how much people make in income in a year between groups. So income inequality is a year at a time. How much money do you make in a particular year compared to other people? And then there's wealth inequality. Wealth inequality is a difference in the amount of total money or wealth between groups. So this is actually, you could have an analogy to the deficit and the debt. Income inequality, sort of 1 year at a time, how much money do you make? Wealth inequality, how much money do you have total? Now, wealth can be positive or negative, and we'll get into that a little bit more. And so we'll talk about in this lecture, first we'll sort of explain what's going on, and then a little bit about why should we care, right? So why should we care if there's this wealth inequality or income inequality? And the take-home point is these factors seem to influence life outcomes, even as much as how long do you actually live. So we'll talk about some of those outcomes later on in the lecture. Okay, so there's gonna be a lot of data and charts in this lecture, kind of like a lot of these lectures. I think it's a good way to present information. So remember, if you're thinking about the test, I'm not gonna ask nitty gritty, percentage questions. I think that's sort of unfair, but focus on things like big picture or which group does better in a particular category. Okay, so the next group of slides, we're gonna talk about income inequality in the United States over time and look at some different demographics. Okay, so this first slide here, it breaks down changes in household income from 1965 through, 2018 or something, if you look at the bottom here. So just to set up the charts. So we're looking at 2018 dollars. So this is probably actually from 2018. So what that means is inflation's taken into account. So inflation adjusted dollars. So comparing, a dollar today, we want to make sure that's an equal comparison to before. And so this side of the chart, this axis here, lists how much income a particular person makes in a year. And it goes from no income, and the top, because it's average, is $400,000. The categories are broken down for the most part into quintiles. So that's 20% categories, but there's also a separate category for the top 5%. So bottom 20, next 20, 60, 80, and then 100 is that top category there. And then again, a separate category for 5%. And the general take-home point from the slide is the rich have gotten richer and everyone else has sort of stayed the same. So the difference between the lines is inequality. So the difference between this top dashed line, which is the top 5%, and the blue line at any sort of given year is inequality. So where I have it here, I don't know, this is like 2004 maybe. The top 5%, the average income was $350,000, and the average income for the top 20% was $200,000. So that's a difference of $150,000. That's a real difference, right? That's a lot of money. I should say maybe average wasn't the best thing to pick here, but I'm sort of constrained by the charts that I can find. The point is exactly the same. Your numbers might differ a little bit if you're looking at median income versus average income. Don't worry about it. Okay, here I said median here, but this is the middle category. And so the median or middle income today is about $63,000. And I should say too, this is household income, not individuals, household. Lots of government statistics, when they talk about income, they use household rather than individuals. There's various reasons for that. Some of it is just the data. A lot of the documents I'm going to present today are based off of tax data, and you remember before, that's generally based off of households, right? So if you're married, you file together. So we're using household income here. You could argue it's not the best measure, but it's pretty good because the money is sort of shared between that household. Okay, so yeah, today the median household income is about $63,000. Now you could compare that to, like, you know, starting teacher makes, I don't know, $38,000 in Oklahoma, probably pretty close on that. I don't know, average starting salary for a professor varies across departments, but might be $70,000, so a little bit above that. That's at OU. It's going to vary a lot across different universities. So just give me an idea, like, I don't know, how much money that is. Okay, the bottom 20%, the household income is $13,000, right? So that's not a lot of money. The next 20% is a little bit higher. But one thing you'll notice across this, the green, the orange, and the red, and even the next one up a little bit, is that these numbers have basically stayed the same over time. So what's that telling you is the household income is not increasing, right? Once you take inflation into account. So people might make, their paychecks might look more, but things cost more. That's inflation. Oops, going the wrong way. This next quintile here, 20%, actually goes up a little bit over time, right? So in the beginning of the chart, we're looking at maybe $60,000, and now it's at $100,000. But we're working our way up the income ladder here. So the green and the orange and the red are the bottom three 20% categories. And there's an equal number of people, if you do it by 20% quintiles, there's an equal number of people in each of these quintiles. So each of 20% of the population. So as you get a little higher up the income quintiles here, the amount of money that people are making in these categories has increased. Sorry. Top 20%, it's increased a lot. So at the beginning of the chart, you know, maybe $125,000, and now it's I don't know, 220, 230, something like that. And so that's gone up. You can also see too, if you look at the end of the chart here, the rich are significantly higher than, so this top 20% is significantly higher than even the next 20%, right? So the next quintile down, the average income is $100,000. Here it's more than double at, I don't know, 230. Then finally, we can look at the top 5%, and that's really high, right? And this is a smaller category, but this top 5% here, so a couple things are happening. The slope really increased over time. So starting from 65, we're looking at, I don't know, $180,000. And then today, this is, I don't know, what is this, 410, 415, right? So the slope is really increased, and it's really taken off in the last number of years. So from, I don't know, 2013 or so, it's really started to increase. It was kind of level here for a while, and then it took off again. So from, you know, I don't know, 2002 to 2010, it was pretty level, and even went down a little bit in the middle of and a little bit after the Great Recession. So take home point, if you look at how did incomes change over time, for the people at the lower end of the income level, has remained pretty flat. But as you move up the income levels, you've gotten richer and richer. So basically the rich are getting richer and everyone else is staying the same. And that's an increase in income inequality over time. This is also looking at income inequality. And so we have two series here. So one, the red one, is the percent of the income for the top 1%. So basically how much money are the top 1% making out of the total income in the economy. So when this red line is higher, the top 1% are doing better. When it's lower, the top 1% aren't doing as well. Then we have another line in here, this black line. This actually measures political polarization. Now it does it sort of in a specific way. It's looking at how the parties vote in Congress, but it's a pretty common way political scientists look at polarization. So as this black line gets higher up the chart, it means more polarization. So a higher number on the right means, or at least anywhere on the chart, means more polarization for the black line. What you're going to notice is these two lines basically run together. So when the top 1% are doing better, we have more political polarization. Is one causing the other? It's hard to tell. But we do know that the wealthy have more political influence. Part of that is they're able to make campaign contributions. Part of that is a lot of our elected officials are wealthy. So they have wealthy friends. And so they might think about politics and the economy in a different way than someone who's at the lower end of the income level. The other two numbers here, these R numbers, it's just a statistical measure of how much are these two trends moving together. So if R is bigger, the trends match better. So across the whole time frame, the correlation, is a measure of correlation, is 0.67. This number ranges from 0 to 1. So it moves pretty well together. But if you look at from 1945, so basically the end of World War II till 2012, and this trend does continue today, these two lines move together almost perfectly. So as income inequality increases, so does political polarization. And I think we're observing political polarization now, right? The Democrats and the Republicans are very much against each other on topic after topic after topic. So we can also look at income inequality across different education levels, and education is a huge driver of how much money you make. It's also a huge driver of life expectancy, of all sorts of things. Now, of course, education probably causes income. Income might then cause some of these other outcomes. It is hard statistically to sort some of these things out. At the end of the lecture, we'll look at how education can help on some of these levels. So on the left here, sort of the black bars, they show unemployment rate by different levels of education, and the blue bars show weekly earnings. We start at the bottom with less than high school diploma, and there aren't that many people in that category. Then high school, some college, and then we sort of go all the way up to people who have doctorates. So I have a PhD, so it's sort of, I guess, the top of the education rankings. So we'll kind of look at, you have a bachelor's degree. This is what most of you are aiming for. Bachelor's degree, this is 2018, pretty low unemployment at 2.2%, right? So doing much better than someone with a high school diploma, right? Almost twice as good. And then in terms of income, they're right at the median. So a person with a bachelor's degree, actually, I'm not sure if this is household. I think this is individuals. So they're doing even, probably as a household, might be doing even better than the median. So bachelor's degree, it's a weekly earnings, and I added this sort of what do you get for a year for that. So you're doing pretty good. Some college, no degree, it's actually much worse. So there's an argument that like one of the benefits of college degrees is kind of just the credentialing. So there's some jobs you can't apply for if you don't have a college degree. You might be qualified, you might have the skills to do it, but actually getting the degree and finishing your sort of outcomes tend to be much better. So one of the take-home points from this lecture is finish your college degree. On average, it is totally worth it. You make more money if you care about that. If you don't care about it, you can make more, you can give it to someone else. Should point out, so we have at the top here, difference between doctoral and professional. So professional, I don't know, it might be like MBA or lawyer or something like that. They make more money than college professors. So if you only cared about money, getting a PhD is not the route. We can look at some of these changes over time. So on the left here, what we're seeing is how much more money do people in these categories, so with a bachelor's degree or an advanced degree, make compared to someone with just a high school degree. And it's over 100%. So if they were down at the bottom here at the 100, that would be a lower comparison. And then as we get up the chart here, they're making even more money compared to people without a college degree. So at the beginning of the time frame, 79 to, I don't know, the mid-90s, we saw a real increase in the returns to having either a college degree or an advanced degree. So there's this growing premium to higher ed. Recently, the premium's still there, right? So you're still making more money than someone with high school, just a high school degree, but it's not changing that much. So some of the returns have leveled off. It's still high, right? But it's not an increasing premium that we saw before. We can also look at sort of who's in some of these wage quintiles. This is back to the 20%. So if you look at this top 20%, in 2016, over 80% of the top earners had college degrees, but in 1979, only 40% in this top category. So if you want to be in this top income category, not everyone, but 80% of the people have college degrees. Someone always points to, like, I don't know, so-and-so dropped out of college and now they're a billionaire. Sure, it can happen, but the odds are against it. And you're much better off finishing your college degree or getting an advanced degree on top of that. So it might be the master's degree. And as you work your way down these wage quintiles, you see fewer and fewer people with college degrees. We can look real quick at sort of income and gender, so break the two down. So the first chart here, we're looking at women's pay as a percentage of men at different education levels over time. So over time, women have been making, they're getting closer to what men are making. So now at 75% of the wage for men. And sort of the trends between college degrees and high school degree sort of moved together. It's worth pointing out though, so women actually earn more college degrees than men, but less money. Now, if you want to do, I think, a proper analysis of gender and wages, you probably need to look like within job categories or something. Sort of looking at this sort of gross way of looking at it misses some nuance, but even when you look within job categories, you still start to see differences. And then we could look at this other chart here. This compares men and women in different wage percentiles. And in all of the wage percentiles, men earn men earn more money than women. And then the difference tends to increase as you go up the highest paid category. So this 95, 90th percentile, men are making significantly more than women. At the lower end, the difference is not quite as stark. We can look at changes in income inequality by race over time, or ethnicity. And so there's a couple things to take from this chart. White and Asian household incomes are generally higher compared to Hispanic or Black, right? So for the most part, if you look at the same points in time, the lines, even across the different categories, are higher for whites and Asians. And also, I should say the top earners, so the orange lines here, the rate of increase is higher for the top earners. So in the 90th percentile, even across all the racial and ethnic categories, the wages, the income are increasing faster for the rich and less so down on the median or the 10th percentile. So whites and Asians generally doing better in terms of income, and top earners are increasing faster over time across all of the categories. Although I think slightly faster and higher for whites and Asians. Okay, so if you want to, like, it's getting kind of long here, if you want to hit pause or something, I'm going to change to wealth inequality here. But as I said, I got to finish this before my kid wakes up from a nap. So if you want to hit pause, go ahead, take a break, kind of switching topics. But I'm going to charge ahead. Okay, so now we're going to look at wealth inequality. And so remember, wealth inequality is the total amount of money that a person or a household is worth. So our familiar quintiles here are 20% brackets. So one thing you'll notice, so net worth is your assets minus your liabilities. So just to talk through this really quick, I don't know, if you want to think about my net worth, I would think I have a house, although I have a mortgage on it. So I have some equity, so that's worth a little bit on the plus side, but I also owe a bunch of money, so it's probably net zero on the home. I have a car, I own it outright, so that's a plus. And then I have some retirement accounts, that's a plus. So I'm getting older, so I'm generally on the plus side here. When I first started out, let's say I finished college, actually, let's say I finished my graduate degree, I had no home, so I had no mortgage, so that was good, but I owed $45,000 in student loans, so that's a minus. I probably had some credit card debt, that's a minus. So when I first started out, I had more liabilities because I drove a '86 Volkswagen Golf that was worth roughly like $300. So when I first started out, I was definitely on the minus side here. And then generally, as you get older, your wealth increases generally. So the bottom 20% actually has a negative net worth. So, oops, I'm sorry, I thought I corrected all of these. So negative net worth, so they owe more than they have. So 20% of the country basically is in the minus. Our next 20% has a net worth of $7,000. The way to think about that is, you know, they're on the positive, so that's good. But imagine you had someone who had no they paid off their student loans, and had a car that was paid off, but lived in an apartment. That's probably about their net worth, right? Assuming there's no retirement account. Then we get to the next middle 20% and the next 20%. So these numbers are getting bigger. You know, this top 20% that's at $200,000. So someone who's probably paid off their home, or they have money in a retirement account. And then finally at the end here, the top 20%, their net worth is, you know, over $600,000. It's a big number, but actually, if you look at sort of retirement calculations, it's less than they tell you should have if you want to retire. So imagine if someone in this category is 65, is thinking about retiring, and you're like, oh, that's a lot of money. But it's probably, it's not the recommended amount of money to retire when you think about you have to have healthcare costs and all sorts of other things. I should say, and we'll look at some like really wealthy people. There's a huge range in this top 20% category, right? So the median's $600,000, but there's people in here who have like billions, right? So that's a huge range. We'll look real quick, who has the wealth, or where is the wealth in our country? So the bottom 90%, that is roughly 270 million people, control 24% of the wealth. So bottom 90%, 270 million people, 24% of the wealth. The top 1%, right? So it's a much smaller number, have 38% of the wealth, which is the same amount of wealth as the next 9%, right? So this 1% category has 38%, and so does the next 9%, right? So top 1%, their wealth is much more than others. So the top 10% have 76% of all the wealth, and the bottom 90% have the other 24%. And remember, in this bottom 90%, you know, 20% or probably a little bit more, they're on the negative, right? So that's counting against. Just real quick, I like things like this. I think they're fun to look at. This says like who is the wealthiest person in any particular state. So we can look at Oklahoma, and it's Harold Hamm and family. So money's in oil. Look at Kansas, Charles Koch. I don't know, I guess he's worth a little bit more than his brother. You know, $42 billion. Some of these are kind of interesting. You know, you look at these, there's all these billions and billions. Vermont, New Hampshire, like these are poor people, right? They only have $1 billion. All right, so the billionaires look down their nose at these folks, like, yeah, you're not in the billionaire club. Waltons, so Alice and Jim. So when the sort of founder of Walmart, this is the Walton family, died, the kids got all the money, and they divided it equally. So the Walmart folks that's worth a lot of money. Okay, John Mars. If you don't know where John Mars got his money from, is the Milky Way. So I don't know, it's probably his grandfather or something, invented the Milky Way, and they own the Mars chocolate company. So he's worth $30 billion. And then, I don't know, probably two sisters or something. They're also worth a lot. So that's candy. Basically, sugar is driving like a ton of the wealth in the country. And you can look across California. We got Zuckerberg, so Facebook. I got a tab of Facebook open on my other screen here. I'm not looking at it, just see the tab. Oregon, Phil Knight, that's Nike. Bezos, we'll look a little bit more about him. Right, that's your Amazon money. Look over to New York, Bloomberg. He ran for president. He's actually, I think, worth a little bit more than that now. So that's some pretty serious money. And some of these people you've never heard of, right? And they're like the richest people in their states. Anyways, these are always interesting to look at. So similar to we look at income inequality on education levels, wealth breaks down exactly the same way, except the effects accumulate over time, right? So if you make more money, you can save more money and your wealth tends to get bigger. So this top line here, this is the sort of the median wealth across education levels. The top line here is people with a postgraduate degree. So people who are making the most in this category are probably lawyers and people with MBAs. Probably like MDs and dentists probably fall into this category too. So the median net wealth for people with postgraduate degrees, it's, I don't know, what is this, $450,000. Then college degree, still pretty well, over $200,000. That's today. We've always seen these differences, but the differences really grew 2007. It came down during the recession. If we were to extend this out to 2020, I think post-grad would turn around and college would continue on the upward trend. So again, this is telling you like the returns to education, to a college degree, both benefit you in your income each year. And this accumulates over time. So it also benefits you in terms of your wealth. And we see lower numbers for non-college degrees. Similar to income, we can look at this by race in some ways. So the top blue line here is whites. And then the bottom line is non-whites. We have two different categories here, but the take-home point is wealth for whites is much higher than for non-whites. And we'll have another lecture on this, but a lot of that has to do with your homes. So for most people, and we'll actually see a slide on this, but for most people, their wealth is in their home, and we had a long time discriminatory policy for how you get a mortgage called redlining, where whites benefited and non-whites did not benefit. Sorry for popping close to the camera there, but my back hurts. So this tells like where, and you could spend more time looking closely at the slide. I just want to hit some highlights here. Tells you like where's the wealth across different categories. So people who have in the categories are $10,000 of wealth, $100,000, $1 million, 10 million, 100 million, $1 billion. And we break down like where is their wealth, and where your wealth is might matter for certain things. So I'm not going to go through all the categories, but green is liquid, so that's generally cash in the bank. The next one, this reddish color here, is your house, your primary residence. We need to, if you're really wealthy, probably more than one house. Orange is a vehicle. And then we start to get into some retirement accounts, and then we start to get to light blue as stocks, and then dark blue is business interests. So you can see like for most people, and they're in these lower categories, the wealth is in their home or the car. So one problem with having your wealth in an asset like that is like, what if you need it in an emergency, right? You can't spend your house in an emergency. Say you had, had to have a surgery and you need money to pay your medical bills. I mean, you can eventually sell your house, but you're going to lose your wealth. It's not easy. There's cost to selling your house. So your wealth is kind of locked up. It's not liquid. You don't have access to it. So, and then you could start to go things like, well, then you have a house, you have to rent. It's harder to build new wealth. Or same thing with like, oh, you have to sell your car to pay a bill, but then you can't get to work. So for people who are sort of on the lower end of this spectrum here, the wealth spectrum, their wealth is in a different place than the wealthy. So as you have more wealth, you get more income in stocks or businesses. Now stocks aren't liquid, but you can sell them if you have to. Depends if it's in a retirement account, that starts to get a little complicated, although that's sort of a different category here. So you can sell them if you have to. Businesses, harder to sell, right? And keep in mind with this chart here is their percentage of the total. So if we look at the billionaire category, their primary residence looks like, oh, that's not a lot of money, but it's percentage of their total wealth. So that category is $1 billion and the house could be worth like, I don't know, 10 million. It's still a smaller part of their wealth, right? You can only spend so much money on a home. And we're looking at primary residence, so 1. So a rich person's home might be a small percentage of their wealth, but it's still like probably worth more than someone who's poor. Every once in a while, you get these oddballs like, I should call him an oddball. Oh, now I'm gonna forget his name. The Oral Club Omaha. I forget his name, but like he lives in the same home. He's worth like billions of dollars and has always lived in the same like ranch house. Probably his other homes though. Folks like Bezos, so like he is wealthy, but most of his wealth is in Amazon stock, right? So the stock goes up and he's worth more because he owns most of it or like a high percentage of it. But he can't just sell it all, right? Like you say, and I have a slide on how much Bezos is worth here, and it's a lot. But he can't just sell it all, right? If he were to sell all of his stock, the stock would probably crash, right? Because Amazon's worth a lot, partly because of him. Right now, there's a lot of workers involved in this, but he's part of the reason why the stock is worth a lot. He's still rich, though. Okay, again, if you want to hit pause, this is getting long. We're going to change topics again slightly. Same big picture here, talking about inequality, but change a little bit. So if you want to hit pause, go ahead. I'm going to keep going. Okay, so a little bit sort of the causes and consequences of this inequality. And here we're going to jump back and forth between wealth and income inequality. So if this was a regular lecture, I would say like, is inequality bad? And you would raise your hands and you would tell me things, but you can't communicate. So I'll give you some yes reasons. So yes, income inequality and wealth inequality is bad because you have a lot of people teetering on the edge, living paycheck to paycheck. They're one car accident or one medical emergency away from bankruptcy. So for people on the low end, it's bad. And then you think about people at the high end, like, I don't know, what does it matter if Bloomberg's worth $50 billion or $60 billion? Like our minds actually can't comprehend that difference. But difference between 50 billion and 60 billion is huge, but like to him, what does it matter, right? Is there anything that Bloomberg wants that he can't get except for the presidency? Okay, other things that are bad, and I'll show a slide on this, is sort of this income inequality differs. The people at the low end of income levels and wealth levels actually have less life expectancy. So rich people live longer than poor people. There's things with obesity. So generally, rich people are healthier than people at the lower end of the income spectrum. There's poor educational outcomes. So children, and we'll talk some details about this, children of wealthy parents tend to do better in school than children of people who have at the lower end of the spectrum. There's questions about, does income inequality drive social mobility? So how do you move across these different brackets? How do you move from being the bottom 20% to the next 20%, top 20%? And there's some evidence that says as inequality increases, it's harder to move across the brackets. Maybe some evidence looking the other way, but it's worth thinking about. And when we have high inequality, political power tends to be concentrated. So think back to that slide about polarization way back at the beginning. When we have high income inequality, we have polarization. And as that moves together, political power becomes concentrated. So basically the wealthy are able to get more from the political system. Their taxes are lower. There's evidence that our politicians would listen more to wealthy people. There's evidence that sort of if wealthy people want one set of policies and low-income people want another, politicians are more likely to side with the wealthy. So that's arguments like, is inequality bad? So those are yes ones. We could also say no, right? So the classic argument is people should be able to make as much money as they want because it provides incentives to work, right? If we lived in a sort of complete communist system, and by no means am I arguing for any sort of like communist system, right? But if we lived in a communist system, I don't know, everyone makes basically the same amount of money in theory. In practice, it actually doesn't work that way at all. But in theory, and so if you're like, well, I don't get any more money by working harder, people don't work hard. However, if you start to look at the evidence, you could increase taxes on the wealthy and like they still work hard. And this is, people work hard across all of the income levels, but this is sort of where the argument gets made is like, oh, taxes are too high, then people will stop working. But evidence actually says that's not true. Another argument against inequality is like quality of life. And usually when they make this argument, they mean like things you can buy are cheap, right? So some things you can buy are cheap, and we'll look at some prices on things in a minute here. But say like, income inequality is high today, but everyone has washing machines and cell phones and computers and all sorts of fun stuff they didn't have in the 50s when income inequality was less. And then there's another argument that says, like, well, we want to have wealthy and these sort of incentives so the rich can, and provides, maybe not the right term here, maybe invent things for everyone else. So iPhones, Google, maybe self-driving cars, right? If the incentives weren't there to create these things, then we wouldn't have them. So these are arguments, inequality bad, yes, inequality bad, no. You can sort of think about both sides. This would probably make a good test question. I'll have to remember to make that to a test question. So why is it rising? Again, if we were in class, you'd raise your hands and talk about these things. So one is the skill-based technological change. So there's some jobs you just need a lot of training for, right? So if you think back to, not that you were on the job market then, but it used to be a time you graduated high school, you walk down to the mill or factory or whatever, and you start your job, right? And you can learn it through an apprentice system. You can do pretty well. So there's a lot of jobs now though that need sort of just more technological skills. And this is related to why you need people with college degrees or advanced degrees are making more money and having more wealth. So there's more and more jobs where you need these skills. And on the flip side, there's actually a lot of jobs where you don't need any skills. So we have sort of service industry, and I shouldn't say any skills, but sort of specialized educational skills. I've seen people do things that a traditional low-paid jobs that are like I can never do that, or the sort of speed at which they can accomplish some of these things is a lot. But so we have some jobs that need sort of high degrees, high skills based on technology, and you won't get the jobs unless you have the qualifications behind it. And that's usually based off of your education. Immigration. So what immigration has allowed, and sort of our, two-path immigration system. So one is probably based off of getting visas, and one sort of, we have had a lot of people enter the country sort of without a visa or overstaying visas. And so this enables people who own businesses really to like exploit workers, right? So we can have very low paid workers, and then there might be a lot of profit in the industry, and that goes to the owner of the company. Decline of unions. So we have fewer and fewer unions. Unions enable labor workers to bargain to get higher wages. So we had strong unions in the auto industry, and they're still pretty strong. But a lot of those auto industry jobs moved from Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania to the South. So one big difference between the North and South is North you have stronger unions, and that's based off of the laws of the state. And so people can bargain for higher wages, or the unions can hire for higher wages on behalf of the employees. So educational unions in New York, auto unions in Michigan, and the other place we see higher wages is some governments. Workers have pretty strong unions too. But the number of unions, the number of people in a union has certainly declined over time. Trade, so what's happened with trade is a lot of manufacturing, old union jobs have been shipped, we say overseas, but a lot of it's like Mexico, but in other countries where it's cheaper and there's no unions, right? So if you can manufacture goods overseas for less, they'll ship the factory over there. And then, so workers in the US lose the jobs, but the owners of the company, or maybe people who own stock in the company, they make more money. Superstar effects. So people who are superstars, so at like the tops of their field, they actually make way more money today than they used to. So someone did the calculations that Babe Ruth, who's known as, I don't know, one of the best baseball players ever, certainly of his time, he would actually make like, I don't know, $1.37 million in today's money. If you follow any sports contracts, he, as the best player of his time, he's probably worth about $40 million a year. So Clayton Kershaw, and actually I made this slide a couple years ago, I don't even know who Clayton Kershaw is anymore. Pitcher, I think, makes $33 million. So when I first put this slide together, it's whole lecture's new, this is also sort of older slide. I think about like some athletes I had in class. So a couple of athletes I've had in class over the years are now like on the make the Pro Bowl, NFL, and they probably make like $20–30 million a year. So the superstar effect, the top people make a lot more money than they used to. And then executives in Wall Street, and this is most of the top percent is executives in Wall Street. It's not athletes. It's mostly people you've never heard of. They're making way more money, and that's because their companies are able to profit. And then there's also Wall Street that, like, I don't know, conjures up wealth out of nowhere, I guess, but people make a lot of money on that side. So whereas they used to make less. And then the minimum wage is sort of way at the bottom here. The minimum wage is not an index to inflation. And so the actual worth of minimum wage has gone down over time. I think if we, I don't know, pick minimum wage in the 60s, and then if we sort of index it to inflation, it might actually be like $14 or $15 an hour today, I think. But it's $7.25. Okay, so a little bit about inflation, how have prices changed over time? And so how much did things cost in this chart here in 1998 compared with today, so 20 years later? I guess today being 2018. And we look at across different categories. So some goods are like much more expensive and some are less expensive. So are things more or less expensive today compared to 1998? So what do you care about? College tuition and fees, way more expensive. So 175% more expensive today than it was 20 years ago. People like to blame all sorts put blame on all sorts of things. Is this a lazy river or a climbing wall? Is it because administrators make all this money? For the most part, the reason, especially for public schools, college tuition fees gone up is because the state used to subsidize education, higher education, much more. So OU today gets about 11% of the money that OU has to spend for its budget in a particular year comes from the state. 11% from the state. The rest has to come from tuition and fees. It comes from grants. It comes from donations. If we were to look back earlier in time, OU might have gotten, probably at the beginning, almost 100% of money coming from the state. So tuition and fee was much less. 98 was certainly not 100%. I think I have another lecture where we look at this, but it was a much higher number that was coming from the state. So the reason we've seen a huge increase in college tuition and fees is because states have lowered and lowered the subsidy to it. So college tuition and fees is not the same as sort of like how much it costs to educate a person. But remember, the returns are high. So like the returns to a college degree are much higher. So it's probably still worth it. Textbooks cost more. I don't know, that's just greedy textbook companies. Your textbook is free. Food costs somewhat more, not a ton more, but also housing costs more. And there's the huge variation across the country. You know, some of you might have friends who live in California. California housing prices are just insane. I kind of always chuckle when people are like, housing in Norman costs a lot. Like, maybe compared to some parts of Oklahoma, but compared to California, it's crazy. You know, there's some cities in California, the median home price is $1 million. You need to put 20% down. You need to come up with $200,000 just for the sort of down payment on a home in places in California. You can buy a very nice home in Norman for $200,000. Some goods prices have gone down. TVs, like TVs are so much cheaper than they used to be. Sort of some of these, basically these electronic goods at the bottom here, way cheaper. I remember how TVs used to be so expensive. They'd also last for 20 years, but were so expensive. Getting a TV was like a huge deal. Computers are way less expensive than they used to be. Household furnishings, so these like goods are way cheaper. And a lot of that is because they're made overseas now. Although, sorry, looking at some of these household goods, like in the last 20 years, basically have, prices haven't changed all that much. So, you know, some things cost way more and some things less and some things about the same. Okay, so I mentioned, and you know, why do we see this income inequality and wealth inequality? And said it's because executives, people on Wall Street, CEOs are making more money than they used to. And a way to think about this is how much money does a CEO make relative to sort of the wages of the average worker? And you can look at that, you know, average worker in their industry or sort of a more broad look. But so starting in 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, CEOs made more, right? And you'd expect the people at the top of a company to be making more money, but like not that much more than, you know, sort of the average worker. And then starting in the 90s, compensation really started to increase, right? So from maybe, you know, 25% more than the average worker to, you know, almost 400% more. See this decline here? This is the Great Recession, and then it back up, and it sort of moves around a little bit. But so people at the top of the companies are making way more than the average worker, and this has really increased. Oh, here's Bezos. You can just look at this, right? Like, how much does he make? He makes $2,500 every second, right? $8.9 million in an hour. So in the time it takes me to record this lecture, he made $8.9 million. I didn't make that much. And you can sort of look at these other numbers. If you want, go to this link here that's at the bottom, and you can, it visualizes his wealth. It's actually a little scary, but interesting too. So if we want to decrease inequality, or why has inequality gone up? It's one reason is the government is taxing people differently. So if you want to decrease inequality, you just tax the wealthy more is one way, right? So sort of take money away from the top and redistribute it to different people. It could be either directly in terms of money, right? We could have the universal basic income if you want, or it could be in, you know, make schools cheaper, or do away with student loans, or, you know, decrease taxes at other levels. But you see the rich, tax rates sort of generally decline for everyone, but they've declined probably more for the wealthy. And remember, if you make $1 million, sort of like, I don't know, 2% change in the top tax bracket, that's a lot of money, right? If you make $20,000, 2% change in your tax bracket is not a lot of money. The percentage is the same, but total dollars is different. So this breaks down sort of the effective tax rates that we talked about in the last lecture for these different income brackets. And so they've generally gone down over time, but the top has really declined. This is another way to look at the top marginal rate. Top marginal rate used to be 90%, right? So think about your tax brackets we talked about before, and the top marginal rate is, was like 37% here. It used to be 90%, right? So that's really declined. So again, the wealthy are paying way less in taxes than they used to. And then some of these other rates like capital gains, I'm not going to, kind of how much money do you make off of investments, that rate's declined, and the corporate income tax is declined too. So people are being taxed less. That means they're getting to keep more of their own money. And you can think of that as a good thing, but we used to sort of tax rich people more, and so people at the lower end of the spectrum did a little bit better. So there's the top rate. That in the 60s is like 90%, and today it's like, what did I say, like 37%. This is just one sort of like life outcome that differs, but this looks at life expectancy for a 50-year-old man in these different income categories. So, you know, these rich people and the next category down, in 1980 expected to live 80 years, a little more than 80 years. Now rich people expect to live almost 90 years. And if you look though down the income levels, you see like life expectancy is lower for people who make less money. Now the real take home point from the slide though is people in the bottom 20% here, their life expectancy is actually decreased. So a 50-year-old in 1980 expected to live, I don't know, 70 years, 72 years. Actually, no, it's more than that because this line is decreased. So in 2010, 76.1 years and probably like 75 years. So if you're in this bottom category, you would live fewer years today than you would in 1980. So the life expectancy for poor people has actually declined where it's increased for everyone else. And you can look across like a range of health outcomes, and they're better for rich people and things have gotten worse for poor people. Now, some of this has to do with health habits. Some of this has to do with alcohol and drug use. Actually, probably not alcohol use. Actually, rich people drink more. People with college degrees drink more too. But using opioids, I think that's one of the big categories here. Okay, so one more thing we can look at is, you know, how do things change over the course of your life based off of where did you start? Where can you expect to end up? So the New York Times and one of your readings will click out to some versions of these. It's taking like this really in-depth look, and it generally uses tax data. So the data are really good. They look at people who are claimed on, because they can track Social Security numbers, claimed on taxes when they were children, and how much money do they make today? Because their Social Security number stays the same, so you can track it. So we look at different, so the chances a child raised in the bottom fifth, so bottom 20%, rose to the top fifth. So in these red numbers here, and we'll get to them in a second, there was a very small chance that you were, if you were born in the bottom 20%, you could make your way to the top 20%. And then the blue numbers mean you had a much better chance. So if it's a blue number on this map here, or blue color on the map, if you were born in the bottom 20%, you have a 35% chance of making it to the top 20%. So this big swath of red here, so people who were born in the bottom 20%, can they get the top 20%? And it's all mostly concentrated in one area of the country. So it's the South, right? And so through South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, and then over into Arkansas a little bit. So we sort of have this pocket of the country, and then also a little bit in the industrial middle America there. But the worst, the place where it's hardest to make your way from the bottom 20%, top 20% is through the deep South. And we know there's other things that correlate here. Education is worse, health outcomes are worse. They all sort of run together through this part of the country. We can take a very, one reason why I think this data is really interesting is because it's huge and it looks at very fine-grained measures in the country. So we can look at Oklahoma County. So we're gonna look at a series of slides here to look if you were born into a family that had a certain income level, what do your life outcomes look like later in terms of your income? So here on this slide, we compare earnings for people who grew up in poor households. So this bottom 20%, and then we look at a child who's born into poor outcomes, what happens to that child as they grow up? What is their income? So people who grew up in poor households in Oklahoma County earn less than people who grew up in poor households either. So what that says is if you want to sort of escape from the low income, Oklahoma County is not a place to do it. Kingfisher County, turns out it is, right? People who are born in poor households in Kingfisher County actually earn much more money than people who were born in poor households elsewhere. So if you're Oklahoma County is generally bad for income and mobility for children born in poor families. So we compare it across the entire country, it's better than only about 17% of counties. So it's not very good. Same comparison, but for children who are born into average income families. So we compare earnings for people who grew up in average households. People who grew up in average households in Oklahoma County earn about the same as people who grew up in average households either. So starting off, if you were born into a poor family in Oklahoma County, it's harder to make more money as you're older. If you're born into an average family, you probably have an average income as you grow up. It's really good, as it turns out, for children born into rich families compared to children born into rich families elsewhere, right? Remember, that's what's going on here, is we're taking children born into an income category in Oklahoma County and comparing that to children born into the same income category in other counties. So people who grew up rich in households in Oklahoma County are more than people who grew up rich elsewhere. So if you're born wealthy, you're going to do even better than other people who are born wealthy in other parts of the country. So your outcomes might differ depending on where you're born, right? And so Oklahoma County is good for children from families in the top 1%. It does better than most counties around the country. I know these are a little complicated, so make sure you do look at the reading that has some of these, because I think it's fascinating, the data that they have and the things we can generalize out from it. Okay, again, if you want to pause here if you want, almost done, but if you want to pause here, we're going to look specifically at education here. Okay, so this figure, it looks at where do students attend college based off of their parents' income. And so we have parental income quintiles across the bottom. 5 is wealthier, 1 is less wealthy. So basically, children of low-income parents, are more likely to attend 2-year colleges compared to public and private 4 years. And think back to earlier slides, the returns to 4-year degrees are better than 2-year degrees or some college. Children of wealthy parents are more likely to attend private and public 4-year colleges compared to lower incomes. So children who come from wealthy households are more likely to go to college. We can break this down a little bit more. So where did today's 25-year-olds go to college? Grouped by their parents' incomes. So if the parent income is in the top 1%, say, they're more likely to go to, these colleges are categorized a certain way, Ivy plus, I think that's like the Ivy League, probably for like Stanford and a couple other top schools, MIT or whatever, elite, highly selective or whatever. So the higher income for the parents, people go to sort of these quote unquote better schools, at least more highly ranked schools. So richer students go to higher ranked schools, low income students go to lower ranked schools or not at all. So the left axis here is the income categories, and then the bottom is sort of the ranking of the schools. Sorry, yeah. The bottom is the percentage of people who go to these certain types of schools based off of rank. We can look at outcomes. So if you are poor and go to a good college, does it help you in terms of your income? And the answer is yes, if you graduate. So the bottom axis here is parental income rank. And then the left axis here is the child income rank. So we know how much money the parents make, we know how much money the child makes. And then we can see that poor students who go to top colleges, right? So they might be in this 10% level here, if they go to an Ivy Plus or elite, their incomes are still pretty high, right? They're able to do much, much better than their parents. So these top couple brackets here. So if you can overcome sort of the low income wealth by going to a good college. Now, of course, you have to get in and pay for it, right? That's the trick. And remember, so people with lower incomes are less likely to attend these top schools. Even poor children, though, do better than their parents at other schools. So, you know, the returns to education are there. Real quick, just a couple of things like what does OU look like? And so there's a study that looked at parental income at colleges across the country. And so this looks at what percent of students at certain schools are in the top 1%, or their parents are in the top 1%, and what percent are in the bottom 60%. So at OU, 4.2% of kids, their parents are in the top 1%. So make $630,000 or more, and 28% come from the bottom 60%. So less than 65,000, and that's about the median income. So there's OU as here, and so the way the story works is you like pick Oklahoma and it plugs it into the chart for you. Really good data journalism. Then we can look at what percentage students are from the bottom 40% compared to some of these other schools. So at OU, 13.4% of the students are from the bottom 40%. And actually it like kind of compares fairly well with some of these other schools. So what can the government do? It can do nothing. It does a lot of nothing. It could soak the rich with more taxes. We can increase the strength of labor unions. We could make education cheaper, can regulate Wall Street, it can perhaps put caps in CEO income. Now, most of these ideas are either democratic or liberal ideas, sort of across this political spectrum. So Biden would, on his platform, would probably want to do some of these things. He would probably not say we should cap the income on CEOs, but want to make education cheaper. So generally, Democrats are for lowering income inequality. And then again, if this were a class, we would talk about all sorts of ideas. So to sum up, we have a large and growing gap between the rich and poor, whether we look at income inequality or wealth inequality. A lot of the gap is related to education. There's worse life outcomes for poor people. And it can potentially be harder to move between income and wealth brackets. Going to top colleges, again, education can help, but fewer children from these lower income households attend the top colleges. And we could reduce inequality via taxes, but if you look at what's happened to taxes over time, the taxes on the wealthy have generally gone down. So we've moved in the opposite direction, which is why the income and wealth economy has grown. So that's it. So yeah, this is a little bit of a longer lecture. I'll have an exam coming up. So good luck.